and we're making some progress along the way. We are in the book of Exodus, and tonight we're going to pick up our continuing study at Exodus chapter 19. Exodus chapter 19 is where we continue. If you're looking at your study guide, we're on lesson 6, about question 9. But if you don't have that, don't worry. You'll be able to follow along with us as we are just reading Scripture as we go along. This is a survey, and so obviously we're not hitting every point of truth and interest in the whole Old Testament, but we are trying to get a good overall picture and a good chronological view in our mind of how all of these events took place. We want to repeat, I think it's always so important to repeat, that our faith is that this is real history, that this is not make-believe or pretend, or that the children of Israel have now come out of Egyptian bondage. They've been miraculously delivered across the Red Sea, and they come to Mount Sinai. Exodus chapter 19 at verse 1. In the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. And so they come to the place where God is going to meet with Moses on Mount Sinai and receive the law. We were talking last week that, for a long time in my mind, I thought it was well established where Mount Sinai was. That if you view a map and you think of the Sinai Peninsula, that Mount Sinai was down near the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. And in fact, my understanding, I've never been over there, my understanding though is that if you go, they will take you to a place that they believe is Mount Sinai, or that is at least traditionally viewed as being Mount Sinai. But in actuality, that is not firmly established. The actual location, which mountain, it's a mountainous area down in there, and which one of those mountains specifically was Mount Sinai is still debated. And of course, it's not critical to us because we're not going to go there and, it's not like we're going to make a religious pilgrimage to a religious site. But it's somewhere down south, either in the Sinai Peninsula itself, near the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula, or it may be over into Arabia, and it's just not known for sure. But as I said, I don't think it matters to us. But we believe in Mount Sinai, and we believe in the events that happened at Mount Sinai. And so the children of Israel had come out of Egypt. And I would take it from the way that's stated in 19:1, Exodus 19:1, in the 3rd month, the same day. So at the beginning of the 3rd month of their travels from Egypt. So I'm arguing they've been gone from Egypt for 2 months, traveling for 2 months when they got to Mount Sinai. We've talked already about this huge mass of people that's traveling here. This is not like, well, let's just say if the bunch of us, we're going to travel. We're going to go from here to Birmingham, Alabama, on foot, and we got a lot of little children, and we got a bunch of animals we're going to be taking with us. How hard do you think that'd be? I'm saying that is going to be terrible. You talk about the logistical nightmare of trying to get just this many people to make a trip no farther than Birmingham. You can drive to Birmingham in 3 hours in a car. But if you're going to walk down there, it's going to be a job. And you got to have provisions along the way for everybody. You got to have food, water. You got to feed the animals. It would be a big job just for this many people. We're thinking that this traveling band constituted probably on the order of 2,000 or more people. 2 million or more people. An enormous crowd of people. And so there was a lot involved. So it's interesting when you read the Bible text, I think it really downplays that. You don't get that sense when you read the Old Testament account. But it was a big deal, a big, huge deal to get this many people going. They'd already been traveling 2 months when they come to Mount Sinai. Now, at Mount Sinai, God is going to give the law to Moses. Now, in the rest of the book of Exodus and in the book of Leviticus are all the rules and ordinances of the law. We're going to skip over that. We're doing a survey, but we're going to skip that because we have in the past, and I'd like to do it again at some point in the near future, study about the law and come to a better understanding about the ordinances of the law, the feast days that were mandated and so forth. It's a really good study and it's a good thing to know. But we're not going to do that right now. We're just going to note that Moses met with God at Mount Sinai and God gave the law. Now, for our thinking processes, we want to remember that this would have been the beginning of what we often refer to as the Mosaic dispensation of time. All prior to this, leading up to this, is what we would call the patriarchal period. God was dealing with the patriarchs of the family. God was directly revealing truths and even communicating directly with the patriarchs of the family. Men like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. But we know that he was in communication with others too. So the patriarchs of family clans, they were the intermediaries to God, and they actually served as priests. Remember when we studied last year, and we studied the book of Job. Job made sacrifices for his children because as the patriarch of the family, he would have served as the priest, the intermediary to God for his family. That changes now. It changes specifically for the children of Israel, for these people. The law that Moses received from Mount Sinai wasn't for everybody. It was for the Israelites. And so we really oversimplify it when we say there was the patriarchal, and then there was the Mosaic, and now we live under the Christian age. That's oversimplification. Because the patriarchal time ended for the Israelites, but not for others. God was still dealing directly with others in the world. And we have just bits and pieces of information about it. We don't know a lot about that. But for the descendants of Abraham, this now becomes the Mosaic age. And they're under the law of Moses after this episode at Mount Sinai. Thoughts or comments, anybody?
That's strange. So when he was dealing with those other peoples, was it a written word, you think, for them as well?
There's no indication that it was. There's no indication that it was. But for instance, the story of Jonah would have been much later than this. And God sent Jonah to the Ninevites, the Assyrians in the city of Nineveh, but with a message that they needed to repent. And so God was still communicating with others. We don't know a lot about that, but we know some of that. Wade?
So I agree with what you're saying. Well, we do know the Ten Commandments were brought down on Sinai.
Right.
I know that. This is a kind of an interesting point that in my study recently, I've found this out. Of course, it may be knowledge for everybody else more than me, but I thought it was interesting because the Jews make a difference between the written law and the oral law. And so Jewish people today, Orthodox Jews, will tell you you can't interpret the law without the oral law that they believe that was handed down on Mount Sinai to Moses. And they call that the Mishnah and the Talmud. You probably heard of that.
Yeah, but I don't agree with that.
Oh, I don't agree with that either.
Yeah.
But so here is one thing I think that shows that that's wrong. Just like you said, God was still communicating. If Moses had an oral law that God gave to him, that he was able to interpret all this, then he wouldn't have had to ask more questions. He was still in communication with God. So let me give you an example. There was an issue, and I think it's here in Exodus, where a woman or two women come to him and they tell Moses, our father has died. He didn't leave any sons. And we think that the inheritance should come to us. Moses had to go back in communication to God and ask him what to do.
Yeah.
If the oral Torah was given down on Mount Sinai, he wouldn't have had to done it.
Yeah. And really, this is what's interesting about the law of Moses, is that it was a written law. It was written down. And it wasn't just the Ten Commandments. Of course, the Ten Commandments written on tables of stone by God's own finger. But that was a minority part. It was major instruction, but there was a whole lot more of law given to Moses and recorded in writing at this time. It's Sarah.
I was thinking of Romans 2:14, it says, "For when Gentiles who do not have the law do instinctively the things of the law, these, not having the law, are a law to themselves, in that they show the work of the law written in their hearts." That
God put a moral nature in man, and was expecting men to live up to it, like the Ninevites. Then Jonah went to the Ninevites, and they were such a horribly gruesome and oppressive people, and God sent Jonah to the Ninevites. I think you're exactly right. For a long time, skeptics said, this can't be true because men did not know how to write in the days of Moses. Writing was invented later. And so they for years they argued that this is not true and you can't trust the Bible because Moses couldn't possibly have written down the law. Men didn't know how to write. Well, that argument, now, of course, skeptics are always jumping on some little shred that they can try to make their case out of. That argument has been completely debunked. And there's been just all kinds of archaeological evidence that suggests that men absolutely did know how to write in this time. Not just Moses, but plenty of other evidence that men did know how to write in this time frame. I saw another hand here. Grant.
I was going to mention, Melchizedek was a king and a priest.
Yeah.
I mean,
And he wasn't a descendant of Abraham.
no, he wasn't.
That's right.
But to your point, the train of thought throughout the Bible is the scheme of redemption. So the focus throughout all of the Bible is what's the scheme of redemption, and how do we go about going? And so we talk about going to Abraham and Isaac, Jacob for the seed promise. And so there's a line of reasoning as you go through the Bible.
Exactly right. So all the way back in Genesis 3, after the first sin, God promised a Savior. And the rest of the Bible story tells how he brought that to pass. And so when we get to chapter 12 of Genesis, it focuses down on Abraham's family because that seed is going to come through Abraham's family. And then we follow it all the way to the birth of Christ and his redemptive sacrifice, and then the church that he purchased with his blood. Josh?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in Acts 10, Cornelius is the first Gentile convert. But even all the way up to that time, it describes him as a devout man, one that feared God with all his house. He gave alms to the people. He prayed to God always. But he hadn't converted to Judaism, evidently. He was a Gentile man, but he was worshiping God.
Still a moral man, living by a moral code of some kind.
Right. So even all the way up to then, so the Gentiles were, they had some knowledge, in like the verse that Sarah referenced. They had knowledge of God. Maybe they learned some from the old law. They hadn't converted to Judaism, but they were still trying to please God by living right in some way.
Yeah.
I just want to comment, you mentioned Genesis 12, or Genesis 12 talks about the land, the nation, and the seed promise, and that's the theme here. And as you get into chapter 19, you see the establishment of the nation.
Yeah. So we got it. So that's interesting, Grant. So as you say, a threefold promise to Abraham. A great nation would come from him. They would possess a land, and the promised seed or Messiah would come to bless all nations. We're actually seeing here the first part of that. There's a nation of people, and there's a significant nation of people, numbering 2 million or more already. So the nation part is coming to pass as we speak. We haven't got to the land yet, but they're heading in that direction. Go ahead.
The nation promise, Exodus 16 and verse 6, chapter 19 and verse 6, I think, establishes that.
Okay, so you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So he actually uses the word nation. Good point. Good point. All right. Okay. Interestingly, when Moses came down from the mountain with the first set of ordinances from God, look at chapter 24, verse 3. Exodus 24, verse 3. Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has said we will do. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and rose up early in the morning and built an altar under the hill, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the children of Israel, which offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen unto the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant and read it in the audience of the people. And they said, all that the Lord hath said we will do, and be obedient. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people, and said, behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord hath made with you concerning all these words. So in order to dedicate this, the people and the law, there was the sprinkling of this animal blood that Moses did here. And the Hebrew writer makes reference to, I just think it's interesting that the history we're reading here is referenced in the New Testament. And this sort of bears out the point we make pretty often. One of the reasons why we study this is because we need this background information, because it's referenced in the New Testament. If we don't know what's going on, what happened back in Old Testament times, then we read some of these New Testament expressions and, well, I wonder what that means. I wonder what that's talking. Look in Hebrews chapter, let's see, Hebrews, well, I've got it written down here someplace. Where am I? Well, I've lost my place altogether. Well, I'm ahead of myself. I'm ahead of myself. Yeah. Well, where am I here? Oh, I'm looking. I've moved my paper. I'm looking at the wrong list. I couldn't find out where I was. Yeah, in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 19. Hebrews 9:19. For when Moses had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and of goats and with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book and all the people, saying, this is the blood of the testament which God hath enjoined unto you. Moreover, he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry. And almost all things are by the law purged with blood, and without shedding of blood is no remission. That's an important expression there at the end of verse 22. Without shedding of blood, there is no remission. That's always been the case, right? In fact, dating all the way back to Cain and Abel, what was the sacrifice that God instructed Cain and Abel to make? Well, an animal sacrifice. Abel did and Cain didn't. God was pleased with Abel's sacrifice and not Cain's. But from the very first reference to sacrifice, sin always required blood. Here, under the law of Moses, sin requires blood. And so what about us? Well, same. It hasn't changed. Sin requires blood. In our case, it's the blood of Jesus. And what a much better law and much better ordinances that we live under. Okay, so Moses went up to the mountain the second time, and in chapter 24, verse 13, Moses rose up and his minister Joshua, and Moses went up to the Mount of God. So he goes up a second time, and it says in chapter 24 and verse 18, he went up to the midst of the cloud and gat him up into the mount, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. And so this was a long meeting of Moses with God on the mountain, receiving the law. And all kinds of instructions about how to make the tabernacle. The word tabernacle means a tent, a temporary dwelling place. So initially the children of Israel had this tabernacle. When they moved from one place to another, they take the tabernacle down and move it with them. There are all kinds of elaborate detail instruction about how to make that tabernacle and all the appurtenances and the furniture and everything that went with it. much detailed information. You know, one of the points I like to make, and again, we're not even going to read that, but one of the points I like to make about that is, you think God doesn't care about details? Read about the tabernacle. And as you're reading, try to keep that all straight in your mind. Every little hook and every little fastener and everything about it. And then say, you know, God doesn't care about details. That is crazy, isn't it? God is a God of details, and very plainly we see that. Anybody? I thought, Sarah. Yeah.
Covenant and read it and hearing the people, and they said, all that the Lord had spoken we will do. They made the commitment to obey the covenant. That was their part. And the blood was sprinkled on the altar, and that was God's part.
Yeah.
Well, when Jesus died and shed his blood, our part is that we agree that we will be obedient to
We have to make our end of the a covenant is an agreement between two. Yeah, that's good. That's a really good observation, Sarah. And so the children of Israel, they weren't very good at following through, but they said, we're going to do everything it says we're going to do. And so they agreed to the covenant. When we come into a covenant relationship today, God has done his part. We have to do our part. Good observation. Again, we're going to skip over the rest of Exodus and Leviticus because coming up real soon here in chapter 25, because Moses was so long on the mountain, remember, they decided that he wasn't coming back, I guess, and they decided to build the golden calf, and Aaron assisted them in the making of the golden calf. When Moses came down from the mountain, you know, Joshua said, I think there's a sound of war in the camp. It sounds like there's war and fighting in the camp. And Moses said, that's not war. And they went down there and they found the people dancing and celebrating around the golden calf. And Moses, this always just, I've told you this before, but it's just so impressive to me. Moses was so angry that he threw down the stones on which God had written the Ten Commandments. What? Come on, Moses, you can't do that, can you? You know, there's no indication that God ever rebuked him for doing that. God made them again, but there's no indication that there was any rebuke of Moses for throwing down and breaking those stone tablets upon which God had written the Ten Commandments. And I think what you learn from that is there is justifiable, what we would refer to sometimes as righteous indignation. It was right for Moses to be angry. He should be angry. When people are so disobedient, it deserves that kind of a response. And then of course other things happened as well. But that golden calf episode is in chapter 32 of Exodus. Okay.
You made a comment about the detail. I noticed, as I've been reading through Exodus, I underlined things like Exodus 25, verse 4, after the tabernacle. Or in verse 1, or chapter 26, verse 30, you're like the tabernacle, according to its plan.
Yeah.
Rather than showing them that. I mean, you just go through here and see where he's being very specific.
Exactly.
According to the pattern.
Yeah. So God is a God of pattern and detail. We serve in this same God. We're not serving under this Old Testament law, but he's the same God. Has his whole nature and character changed? I don't think so, do you? Interestingly, someplace up in Pennsylvania, the Amish people have built they've taken all of these instructions about the tabernacle and they have tried to follow them meticulously and make a full-scale replica of the Old Testament tabernacle. I've not gone there, but I really would love to see that. Pretty amazing from what people who have seen it, what they've told me is pretty amazing. It's not that big of a building. It's not that big of a tent, actually, but they have done that. But you'd have to pay close attention to detail if you're going to carry it off. Wade?
Yeah, I was trying to look and see, but I'm pretty sure the next time the tablets were made, Moses had to get the tablets this time.
He had to bring, you get to cut the stones.
He had to cut the stone himself. God didn't cut the stone. He cut it himself.
Yeah.
So even though God may not have rebuked him, he made him do the work this next time.
You would think, though, if there was ever a sacred relic, you would think those tablets of stones would be a sacred relic. Moses threw them down. Yeah. All right, everybody. Okay. All right, let's go on into the book of Numbers. So we're skipping the aspects of Exodus that talk about the law. We're skipping the whole book of Leviticus, which is the law. It's important stuff, and I don't want to discount the importance of that. It's really not a pertinent part of a survey kind of study like we're trying to do here and get all the chronological events of the Old Testament in our minds. But it's really important, and as I said, hopefully at some point in the not too distant future we can study that Old Testament law to get a better grasp of what were they expected to do exactly. Not that we do it, but what were they expected to do. All right, as we get to the book of Numbers then, it says in chapter 1, verse 1, the Lord spake to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of the congregation on the first day of the second month in the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt. So so they're into the second year. Go back to Exodus 19:1. It says when they arrived in Exodus 19:1, it was in the third month when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. So to the beginning of the third month is when they came to Mount Sinai in the beginning of the third month in the first year. This is the first day of the second month of the second year. So this is 11 months later, right? And so they'd been there at Sinai 11 months. And again, if you don't kind of focus on some of those little details, you think, oh yeah, they were there for a few days and then they just kept on going. No, they were there for almost a year. And during that year, they not only received instruction about how to make the tabernacle, they made the tabernacle. And now they're moving it with them when they go from one camping place to the next. And all the furniture.
The law that God gave them in Leviticus, besides the Ten Commandments. So they had a lot going on that first year.
They sure did. Exactly right. There's a census. God instructs them to take a census. Verse 2, take ye the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel after their families, by the house of their fathers with the number of their names, every male by their polls, from 20 years old and upward, all that are able to go forth to war in Israel. Thou and Aaron shall number them by their armies. And so a general census was taken, and it was to be of just males 20 years and older who were able to go to war. Well, they did that, and if you skip down to verse 46, Numbers 1, verse 46, even all they that were numbered were 600,000 and 3,550. So 600, 3,550, just over 600,000. Now, get this. This is fighting men, 20 years old and older. Well, how big is this nation of Israel at this point? Well, you got to figure. Now, that's not counting any of them that were younger than 20. All kinds of. There could have been a huge number of children under the age of 20. You got to figure that if this is counting men 20 years and older, then there surely be nearly an equal number of women. So if you just had the men and the women, that's 1.2 million. Yeah, so again, I don't think 2 million's a stretch at all. Probably is a low estimate. Sarah?
So did not count the Levites.
That's right. The Levites are excluded. Let's see, I had a note here. Yeah, 47. Yeah, the very next verse. But the Levites, after the tribe of their fathers, were not numbered among them. So, again, I think 2 million is a significantly low estimate of how large the nation of Israel was at this point in time. The Levites were given specifically the care of the tabernacle and everything in it. Look here at verse 50. Thou shalt appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of testimony, and over all the vessels thereof, and over all the things that belong to it. They shall bear the tabernacle and all the vessels thereof, and they shall minister unto it, and shall encamp round about the tabernacle. And when the tabernacle setteth forward, the Levites shall take it down. And when the tabernacle is to be pitched, the Levites shall set it up. And the stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death. And the children of Israel shall pitch their tents, every man by his own camp, and every man by his own standard throughout their host. But the Levites shall pitch round about the tabernacle of testimony, that shall be no wrath upon the congregation of the children of Israel. And the Levites shall keep charge of the tabernacle and the testimony. And the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so they did. Again, I think this kind of goes to what Wade was saying earlier. Notice there, the Levites, after their tribe of their fathers were not numbered, the Lord had spoken unto Moses, saying, only thou shalt not number the tribe of Levi. So here's a specific case where God was still speaking to Moses. It wasn't just the written down law, but he was still dealing with Moses too. Yeah, Wade.
What do you think the difference is in this census? Then in 1 Chronicles 21, David takes a census of his people. Then Satan stood up against Israel and incited David to count Israel. Of course, they didn't count Benjamin and Levites in this census either. So what do you think the difference is in this census and that one in 1 Chronicles 21?
I'd have to go back and work on that. This is obviously a commanded census, and they had actually been forbidden to take a census there, but I'd have to go back and try to find Wayne?
One of the differences is that this was supposed to be the time that they were going to prepare to take the land of Canaan.
Yeah.
And so they had to know the fighting men.
Yeah.
And they had to know who they were, what their task was and all that in order to take the land. Even though God was going to be with them, they still had their parts to play in that. And so that, to me, that makes a big difference between the numbering that David did, the ungodly numbering, or illegal numbering.
It was known because, when David said, let's take a census, his counterpart said, we better not do that. We're not supposed to do that. It was known not to take a census. And so this was commanded and that was forbidden, but I'd have to look to get the details of why David was specifically instructed not to do that. All right. Again, they stayed there for 11 months. In fact, it says in if you go to chapter 10, verse 11, chapter 10 of Numbers, verse 11. It came to pass on the 20th day of the second month in the second year that the cloud was taken up from off the tabernacle of testimony, and the children of Israel took their journey out of the wilderness of Sinai. So actually they were there for 11 months and 20 days. If you compare this to Exodus 19:1, you just got to calculate the time difference between Exodus 19:1 and Numbers 10, verse 11. I think it's 11 months and 20 days. Okay. We already established the history of the children of Israel to be a complaining, griping, and murmuring people. And they still are at it. That nature has not changed in them. Look in chapter 11. In chapter 11 at verse 1. When the people complained, it displeased the Lord, and the Lord heard it, and his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burnt among them and consumed them that were in the uttermost parts of the camp. And the people cried unto Moses, and Moses prayed unto the Lord, and the fire was quenched. And he called the name of the place Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burnt among them. And the mixed multitude that was among them fell a-lusting, and the children of Israel also wept again and said, Who shall give us flesh to eat? We remember the flesh which we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But now our soul drieth away. There is nothing at all besides this manna before our eyes. And the mander was like a coriander seed, and the color thereof was the color of bdellium. People went about and gathered it and ground it in mills and beat it in a mortar and baked it in pans and made cakes of it. And the taste of it was like the taste was the taste of fresh oil. And when the dew fell upon the camp in the night, the manna fell upon it. Moses heard people weep throughout their families, every man in the door of his tent. And the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly. And Moses also was displeased. And Moses said unto the Lord, Wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? And wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight, that thou layest the burden of all this people upon me? Have I conceived all this people? Have I begotten them? That thou shouldest say to me, Carry them in thy bosom, as a nursing father beareth the sucking child, unto the land which thou swearest to their father. Whence should I have flesh to give all this people? For they weep unto me, saying, Give us flesh that we may eat. I'm not able to bear all this people alone, because it is too heavy for me. And if thou deal thus with me, kill me, I pray thee, out of hand, if I have found favor in thy sight, and let me not see my wretchedness. Okay, a couple things here in this story. One of the things, and we talked about this last week, of course, just the Israelites are just notorious murmurers and complainers and grumblers. They do it over and over and over. And surely all of us, when we see that in them, it's just despicable. How can they be like it? We'll learn the lesson. It's no better. We don't look any better ourselves when we murmur and complain and grumble about whatever. There's a way, even when there's trouble, even when there's difficulty, there's a way to approach it, and there's a way not to approach it. So they needed food. Okay, we accept that they needed food, but this is not the way to go about solving that problem, right? But notice again how they rewrote the history. Oh, we just remember how wonderful it was back in Egypt. We had all the food that we could ever possibly imagine. It was just wonderful. We had such all kinds of food and fresh vegetables, and it was just so wonderful. Now here we are. All we got is this despicable manna. I'm so sick of this manna. I can't stand any more of it. You know, God's sending bread from heaven. You just have to bend down and pick it up. And they're complaining about it, right? So again, the Israelites look really bad in this. The other thing that I think a lesson to be drawn from this text is Moses is really a good person. Moses is a powerful leader. Moses is a mighty man of God. But these people, and I say that way, these people are such that they had worn him down. They had completely depressed and discouraged him. Please just kill me. I don't want to be here anymore. He's that. You can't get any lower than that, right? But it's all because of the horrible griping and complaining and murmuring of the children of Israel. So, you know, we need to learn a lesson from that. That our job for each other is to build one another up. We need to be acting in such a fashion that we encourage and strengthen one another spiritually. We do not want to imitate the Israelites and be such a people that we depress and discourage those around us. I'll tell you, Moses is a great man of God, but he had been brought all the way down. He was dragging at this point in time. Thoughts or comments? Sarah?
I think a really powerful verse in verse 23 is God's answer to Moses. He had just said, you know, I've got 600,000 people to feed, and am I supposed to kill all the animals? How
How am I supposed to do this?
God's simple answer is the Lord's power in it.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to remember too.
I think that's a good point. Good point for sure. Anybody else have a thought here? Okay, so God instructs him in verse 31. There were sent forth, that's going to be about the quails. There is instruction in beginning of verse 16, won't read it, but there's instruction for Moses to appoint a system of elders, 70 elders who would be over the people. And it's sort of almost like, I kind of view it sort of like an appeals court process where, take it to the judge. If he can't figure it out, we'll take it up. And ultimately, Moses, on the very hard cases that the judges couldn't decide, Moses would be the ultimate judge. But to take some of the burden, because they were coming to Moses with every little detail, every little griping problem that they had. And there's a lot of them. You think about that many people, there are going to be a lot of interpersonal issues, contentions. He said that. No, she said that. No. And Moses just couldn't take it anymore. And so this system of judges was appointed by God to be able to sort of handle and let them handle the lesser matters and then bring the harder matters to Moses. And that's the way that worked. Now, the craving for meat. They were tired of the manna and they craved for meat. And in chapter 11, verse 31, there went forth a wind from the Lord and brought quails from the sea and let them fall by the camp. And it were a day's journey on this side, as it were a day's journey on the other side, round about the camp, as it were 2 cubits high upon the face of the earth. And all the people stood up all that day and all that night, and all the next day they gathered the quails. He that gathered least gathered 10 omers. And they spread them all abroad for themselves round about the camp. And while the flesh was yet between their teeth, ere it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord smote the people with a very great plague. And he called the name of the place, and I'm not going to try to say it. There they buried the people that lusted, and the people moved on. So, actually there had been a previous reference to quails being given. Back in Exodus chapter 16, there was a reference to that God had sent some quails. But here he sends quails in abundance, and a plague followed because God was angry with their complaining and grumbling. Okay, that's a good place for us to stop. We're ready to start chapter 12. Lord willing, we'll do that next week. Next Wednesday night is Christmas Eve night. My guess is that a whole lot of churches in Murray County are going to not have services next Wednesday night. We are. We are. And we think that's the right thing to do for sure. We don't believe that there is a religious observance of Christmas. And therefore, we wouldn't even begin to think about canceling church services for Christmas Eve kind of thing. Thanks for being here. And we'll pick up our study there next week, Lord willing.